Let's get into it now. A spoiler-free movie review of Didi. It is a coming-of-age story of a 13-year-old in his last summer before starting high school. Didi is a movie for anybody who's ever been a teenager. Simple as that. I love coming-of-age movies, and there's a very delicate line you need to walk to tell a story about a 13-year-old. We've all been there. We've all been teenagers. We know what the experience is like. You're very angsty. You want to lash out against your parents. You're navigating all these feelings, relationships, all these things you're experiencing for the first time. For me, getting a lot of hair, starting to smell weird. All those things that go along with being 13 years old. The line you have to walk while making a movie about this is, do you want to make it appeal to 13-year-olds, or do you want to make it appeal to the adult to look back and remember on what it's like being 13? In the case of Didi, it is making that experience feel very adult, taking everything into consideration of what you experienced to that time and validating it, not making it feel less than, just very much giving an adult perspective on what it was like being 13. Because if you think back on that time, you in your head when you were 13 saw things as, I'm now older, this is affecting me, nobody understands me. You felt in that moment that you were an adult. You look back later when you're 18, 20, whatever, 30, and you think, oh, I was just a dumb kid. But in that moment, you believe like this is your whole world. Nobody understands you. Your parents don't get you. So I really love that perspective from this 13-year-old who isn't a bad kid, but he's not the best kid. He gets into some trouble. And I very much identified with Didi in this movie. Oh, because there were so many aspects of this movie. The very first thing I want to talk about is I love that this movie was set in 2008. I've talked about on this podcast how I feel my best year was 2009. And I would say my best school year was my senior year, which was '08 to '09. And the reason that is, it's because that was a time in my life where I had the least amount of responsibility and the most freedom. Senior year, I could drive. My classes in high school were very laid back in my senior year. I had like half days. So I was looking ahead to college, but I knew this was the time in my life that I was just going to enjoy it, go do things with my friends, not take things so seriously, because I knew once college started, then okay, then it's time to get to work. Then it's time for me to start thinking about my future more. Not that I wasn't thinking about it in high school, but I allowed myself to be fully engaged in those summer activities. And that, I believe, was that last time I felt alive in some aspects. And, you know, my life is good now. That is a time that I feel was just so great. And obviously, I'm biased because the mid to late 2000s is where I experienced a lot of things. But I think that was the best decade to grow up in and be young. And Didi is a great example of that. It took me back to things I haven't thought about in 10 years. The MySpace era, which in this movie, Didi is friending people on MySpace, looking up their profiles. At the very start of the movie, there's a girl he has a crush on. He goes to her MySpace page to learn things about her. He finds her profile song, which is a Hello Goodbye song, takes that song and makes it his phone ringtone, which that even brought back memories of how important it was to me to pick the right ringtone. For me, it was probably like Alkaline Trio, maybe Rancid, Newfound Glory, and that was a thing. Callback tones were a thing. And I also think that was the best time to be a teenager because for millennials, we got to experience the early stages of the internet where nothing was really that serious yet. We were still navigating social media. I had a Zanga page, I had MySpace, I had Facebook. But at that time, nobody took it that seriously. There weren't influencers, and it was kind of the Wild West on what went into creating your page and just friending people. We had a top 8, which were so brutal, and was something also shown in this movie of how you would rank your friends. And I remember the like ultimate thing for me growing up was like making my crushes top 8, and I was like, how did I get in there? What did I do? My life is gonna change forever because I made it in their top 8. But it was a brutal thing, and a lot of what happens in Didi has to do with the technology at that time. Very early filmmaking because he starts filming with these skateboarders. So it's very much the introduction of the internet. But it was almost like we were all putting on a front at that time to create these awesome social media profiles. via Facebook and MySpace, which I guess we all kind of do that now. But I just remembered how important that was as a teenager to be friends with your crush on Facebook or MySpace and just all the politics that went into that. So I very much felt nostalgic connecting to Didi's story. The other thing that really struck me just on a personal level, even more so than the MySpace and the music during that time, which I would say was MySpace core, but also very much Warped Tour core, where my entire summer was based around how good of experience I was going to have at Warped Tour. But the soundtrack just kind of mirrored that and was very much a reflection of 2008 and 2009. But the family aspect in this movie, because Didi is a first generation American, he is from a Taiwanese family, and he lives with his mom and his grandma, who is very traditional. They take schoolwork very seriously because if you don't do good in school, you won't get into a good college. If you don't get into a good college, you won't get a good job. If you don't get a good job, you won't find a good partner. And a lot of those pressures that not only his mom and his grandma put on him in this movie are what he's kind of rebelling against. And I got that a little bit in my family because my parents did want me to go to college being a first generation American myself. And it wasn't so much that there was this pressure that they could show me off to like my family, which was a thing in this movie. They wanted to impress their aunts, their uncles, everybody else in their family. It was just they wanted me to have a better life than they did. So I identified more with the relationship he had with his mom, who his dad in this movie really isn't in the picture. He is working back in their native country to try to make money to send back to them so they can live their life. But it was this unique relationship he had with his mom, who was just trying to do her best, trying to raise their two kids and feeling like she failed. And it reminded me of a conversation I had with my mom fairly recently where she felt bad for what kind of mom she was growing up to us. And my mom didn't finish, I don't even think she finished elementary school, never made it to middle school. She came to the United States as a teenager and did a lot of things just to make ends meet. One of those being she got a job when I started probably first or second grade at Taco Bell, and she's been there ever since. And she told me she felt like she failed as a mom because she couldn't provide more for us, because she felt like I'm just somebody working at Taco Bell. And hearing my mom have these really human experiences, kind of feeling the way that I feel at times, feeling like I failed them. I never really heard my mom speak in that way, where I always just saw her as my mom, person who did everything for us. She was kind of like a superhero in my eyes. And realizing that she was probably the age I am now at that time when I was, starting school and she went to go do that job, that I just thought, man, like, we're just humans. We're just trying to survive. And even somebody like your parents who you think have it all figured out, they don't. So it made me feel a little bit better about where I am in life, thinking that my mom didn't know that she was making the right choice or not back when, my oldest brother and oldest sister were already, you know, on the path that they were on. They were all good, but still making sure that I had what I needed to survive. And I think she feels bad about sometimes the way we grew up, that we didn't have a whole lot. And I never really saw it as like, oh man, it sucked being poor at the time. I feel like not having a lot growing up, made me appreciate more what I have. And it was watching Didi that brought all those kind of emotions up of what it's like to have parents who immigrate from another country and come here without a whole lot, trying to keep your heritage alive, but also adapt to American society, which is what Didi is trying to do in this movie. And it's so hard. Even his name, his family calls him Didi, but to everybody else at school, he goes by Chris or another nickname. That was kind of what I experienced too growing up, because Mike's not my real name. And I never really used my full legal name in school just because I kind of wanted to blend in a little bit more. Also, how Didi did, of the music he's into. He's into the skateboard culture, which was also what I was into growing up. And being Mexican, people assume that I wouldn't be into that. So There's a line in this movie that I won't ruin because it kind of hit me right in the gut, and I'll let you experience it. But it was a reference to his race in a moment where he thought he was just being a peer, maybe a love interest, that he was almost reduced to nothing because they pinpointed what he was based on his race. And I felt that because sometimes people have told me, hey, you're not really Mexican, you're kind of white. And I don't even know what that means just because I have sometimes nerdier tendencies, sometimes because I lean towards liking punk rock and things that aren't traditionally Mexican. What is even traditionally Mexican? I always was into what I was into. I don't feel like I based it around my race. It was just what I was exposed to and what I liked, but I was viewed as being different because I wasn't into traditional things that a person of my race should be into. So there were just a lot of parallels between how I felt I grew up, the past I had to navigate, and what Didi had to felt growing up, which I feel was good for me to see, to know that it is kind of, there are things that are unique to growing up Mexican American, but I feel like there are a lot of just parallels with anybody who immigrates from another country to the United States. So it was cool seeing that I could identify with somebody else from a different country and know that we kind of went through those same things. So if you are like that too, this is definitely a movie you have to see, especially if you grew up in the mid to late 2000s, because it's going to feel like a huge nostalgia trip. They also use AOL a lot in this movie, which I hadn't thought about in a really long time. Just those sounds of like sending messages, adding people, blocking people, sending an away message. That brought back a lot of memories. I remember the first time I got an AOL account. I was Alkaline Punk 13 because my favorite band growing up was Alkaline Trio. I was like, yeah, let's throw punk in there. Cool number 13. I just remember getting on there, messaging people how much of a thrill that was. I could crush hours on a dial up connection on AOL. That was very much a very 2008 experience. This movie is right under 90 minutes, so if you're somebody who likes a shorter movie, this is perfect for you. At the very start of this movie, I thought it was just going to be kind of a coming of age story that I'd already seen before. But once you really get into it, you start seeing the dynamic he has with his sister, with his family, and the fact that a lot happens to Didi in this last summer before high school. By that third act, you are all in, invested emotionally, and you want to see more of his story. And by the time it was over, I was like, oh man, I got to know what happens in high school. So this movie only gets better as it goes along. I easily give it 4 out of 5 friend requests. I think if I put in my bias of being a first generation Mexican American and identifying with what Didi goes through, I'd probably put in a point 0.5 bias, but I feel good at giving it a 4 out of 5. That is a strong 4 out of 5. And I would also put this in my top 5 coming of age movies in the last 10 years. Really enjoyed this movie. I think it's going to be a movie that I keep revisiting, especially once it hits streaming. So if you're looking for some coming of age movies, definitely check out Didi.